welcome back to my channel, Boomy Reactions. Now today guys, we have a history video I would like to share with you all. So this video has been requested by one of my lovely patrons, and this is from Mike. And Mike says, hey Boomy, I've got a great suggestion for a video reaction that I believe you will like. It's by the naval historian. Oh gosh, I'm gonna attempt to pronounce this one. This is, right, hang on. Drakenifel? Drakenifel? Have I said that right, guys? Okay, I've never seen that name before. He's from your neck of the woods. Oh, he's a Brit, is he? And the title of the video is The Russian 2nd Pacific Squadron, also known as Voyage of the Damned. Oh, now straight away, I don't think this rings any bells. I don't think I've heard of this before, so this is educating me, Mike. Proof that the truth is crazier than fiction. And thank you for your positive and upbeat videos. Oh, you're welcome. I found your levity and enthusiasm highly enjoyable. Oh, Mike, stop. Thank you so much, my lovely. Right, okay. So I did a little bit of snooping into this YouTube channel because I think I'm going to keep struggling to say the name of the channel. So Drakenifel, this is a naval historiographer. So what's the difference between a historian and a historiographer? Is a historiographer? Do they study, how do I describe it? Is it like the study of how historians record history, or do they scrutinize the sources? Help me out, guys. Let me know in the comments what the difference between the two is. Okay, so this naval historiographer is known as, what's the surname? It's Alexander Pocklington. So for the sake of this video and not making a fool of myself over and over again, mispronouncing this name, I'm going to refer to him as Alex. Very, like on first name terms, sure. So yes, I'm going to refer to this channel as Drakenifel, is that right? And this is done by Alex. This is his historiography channel. Okay, so let's get straight into the video, guys. And if you're enjoying these reactions as well, my lovelies, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe. Thank you so much. If you're interested, I have a Buy Me a Coffee account, and that link is over here. And if you would like to help support my channel any further, I have a Patreon account. And if you want to check that out at all, that link is in the description below. Right, okie dokie, let's go. I believe Alex is quite the master in this field here. It's very interesting. Guides to warships, World War II and World War II, more or less. Oh, this is excellent, because I do feel quite often when I'm watching videos, particularly by the Fat Electrician, I don't claim to be too educated in terms of, military terminology or, war tactics or anything. So sometimes I do feel like I'm a bit of a babbling idiot at times. So you just have to bear with me. But yes, this would be very, very helpful for understanding, It's great footage, isn't it? He's going to pronounce it
Just
now.
a quick note before we go into the main topic of this week's video. Unfortunately, there wasn't a fantastic amount of photographs taken of this particular voyage and the ships involved. Or at least if it was, it went to the bottom of the ocean with most of the ships. So unfortunately, there's not a lot of extant photography available for it. Yeah. So the number of photos in this video will be somewhat limited compared to the regular amount that we have in various videos. So I do apologise for that, but hopefully it won't detract too much.
Oh, bless
anyway.
Apologise.
So, the first, and spoiler alert, last voyage of the Russian 2nd Pacific Squadron is about as close a candidate to the appellation Voyage of the Damned as you're ever likely to get. But quite how did this floating disaster, which literally drove some of the men involved insane, and which would ultimately find its end at the Battle of Tsushima, actually come about?
Oh my gosh!
Well, with the outbreak of the Russo-Japanese War, one of the first things that the Russians had found was that their Pacific harbour at Port Arthur was actually more curse than blessing.
Why?
Although it was a warm water port, something that Russia lacked in any great amounts, it was relatively easily cut off from land-based support, being right at the end of a peninsula, and the hills surrounding the port allowed enemy artillery free range over the ships that should otherwise have been safe within once those heights had been captured.
Oh no.
The shallow nature of the harbour mouth also meant that larger ships could only enter or exit on a high tide, and to top it all off, the officers present were not really fit to lead the warship stationed there into any kind of serious fight.
So, all in all, not the promising location that they might have thought it would have been.
Incidental losses to the Japanese fleet and mines laid by Japanese ships, as well as a relatively poor start to the land campaign, were painting a rather dismal picture after a few months of the war's continuation. In response, the Tsar, Nicholas II,
Yes.
sent Admiral Makarov, a somewhat unconventional but very capable and popular officer who was perhaps the best admiral Russia had, or indeed could ask for.
You know this is going to be a great character because he's got quite an eccentric beard, doesn't he? Like a bit like my hair. Do this. That is a mighty beard. Good sir.
Very quickly, he started to turn things round,
Okay.
and the future, if not bright, at least looked a lot more promising than it had. But this all came to a screaming halt when the flagship of the Russian Pacific Fleet, the Petropavlovsk, hit a mine. The explosion
Oh, no.
and flying debris decapitated Admiral Makarov and deprived Russia of one of its most capable battleships
Oh no.
and its best naval commander at the same time.
Quite a blow to the Russian forces there. No pun intended either. That actually, I immediately regret saying that.
5 other admirals had been in consideration for the role of commander of the Russian Pacific Fleet, and since the Tsar was determined not to surrender Russia's hold in the Pacific to Japan, he would need, of course, to appoint a new commander. But with what was now effectively 2 naval squadrons in the Pacific, trapped in Port Arthur and Vladivostok respectively, and with both of them failing to break the Japanese blockade in order to link up, at the cost of even more damaged warships, it was clear that more ships would be needed, as well as a new commander. So the new admiral could not simply be sent over the Trans-Siberian Railroad, as Makarov had done. Fortunately, Russia actually had 2 other fleets, the Baltic and Black Sea fleets. And so it was from at least one of these that more warships would have to be assembled. They would be named the 2nd Pacific Squadron, and then sent around the world to engage the Japanese fleet.
Oh gosh.
The minor issues of Russia not actually having any refueling or resupply bases in the intervening 18,000 miles, the rules of war not really allowing neutral countries to provide aid on the scale that a fleet of this size would need, the fact that Russia was not exactly the most popular country with most of the other imperial powers, and especially with Britain, which controlled most of the bases and had most of the ships that were along the projected fleet route, and the fact that Russian warships were in no way designed to sail this far or through tropical environments at all, which of course they would encounter crossing the equator several times, were all to a large degree ignored. And so Rear Admiral Zinovy Petrovich Rozhesvensky was appointed to the 2nd Pacific Squadron. All things considered, he was probably the best choice the Tsar could have made, although even less political than Makarov and given to furious fits of temper. He was not corrupt, which was itself exceptionally rare in the upper echelons of Russian naval officers at the time, and remarkably fair, if exceptionally demanding, to his crews. Despite being...
It just sounds like he's got really high standards. Maybe. Okay, the fits of temper are probably a no-no. But, at least you kind of know where you stand with him. He said, Alex says he was a fair commander.
Disliked by many in the upper echelons of the Russian Navy, the ships he'd commanded had always been well-disciplined, fast, accurate with their gunnery, and ready to go on a moment's notice.
Now, this kind of rings bells. I know I don't think Alex is going to go any more into it, but from listening to enough stories from Nick, the fat electrician, quite often when there's a commander that isn't liked by his superiors or his colleagues, there's normally, not always petty, but there's normally personal reasons going on there. So, why would they not like him if he runs a tight ship? He's well disciplined. His men consider him fair. Maybe they don't particularly like him if he has bits of anger, but I'm wondering to know. I'm wondering why his colleagues aren't too keen on him at this point.
A fact which hadn't escaped the Tsar.
Okay.
The fact that Rozhesvensky had actually managed to impress Kaiser Wilhelm II, who of course had his own naval ambitions at the time, during a visit to Russia, also didn't hurt his chances for appointment. And you'd be hard-pressed to find a more popular admiral amongst the crews,
There we go,
because
see?
although he was given to beating crewmen who disappointed him with his fists,
No!
the crew also knew that pretty much the only thing keeping him from laying an equal smackdown on officers who disappointed him or mistreated their men was the fact that most of the upper echelons of Russian naval officership at the time were connected in some way to the Russian imperial court, and so beating the ever-living daylights out of them would be somewhat deleterious to anybody's careers.
I mean, you'd think in any profession that's still probably frowned upon. See, I'm suspecting there's personal reasons they don't like him. If his men like him, and not only they don't just tolerate him, they like him. He's fair. They all know where they stand. Yes, he can be strict, to say the least. But, he has the respect of his men. It's normally a telltale sign of some kind of ridiculous pettiness going on amongst the higher ups. Maybe he's had an affair with someone's wife or something.
A total of 45 ships from the Russian Baltic Fleet were being prepared. A force that was, on paper, strong enough to break the Imperial Japanese Navy blockade, and with it end the campaign, since the invading Japanese troops were almost totally reliant on seaborne resupply.
Mm-hmm.
To address the issue of the ship's fuel supplies being hopelessly inadequate, a plan was designed for freighters chartered from the German Hamburg-America line to refuel the ships either at sea or in neutral ports that could be persuaded to allow it. The fact that coaling a ship was a difficult, exhausting and hazardous task when tied up in dock, and nobody had even tried refueling an entire coal-powered fleet at sea,
On the sea,
was,
yep.
you guessed it, ignored.
Why? They've got so many red flags, and just, I think a lot of people are just kind of ignoring the harsh realities of a plan not being a good plan, because there's an awful lot of dangerous elements to that plan that they're not really considering. Alex is foreshadowing something. Oh, gosh.
The ships themselves were also something of an odd mix. Many of them were influenced by French designs and had a pronounced tumble-home hull, which was proving quite the stability concern across both French and Russian navies as the ships had come into service. Quite a number of them were also significantly overweight, which had the effect of dropping the main armour belt largely below the waterline, and the secondary and tertiary batteries then coming dangerously close to the water on a number of vessels.
Now, again, I don't claim to fully understand the physics, the ins and outs, the engineering jargon about these ships, but even I can detect that none of that sounds good. It's an accident waiting
Work
to
quality
happen.
was also not exactly up to scratch. The new battleship Oriole was fitting out in preparation for joining the 2nd Pacific Squadron, until someone removed some of the sheathing, forgot that battleships do actually need their hulls to be intact to float, and went home for the day, leaving the ship to sink whilst anchored in Kronstadt harbour, which necessitated the ship being refloated and repaired before it was ready to
I would
depart.
hate to be that guy. Can you
Some
imagine?
of the ships were new and untested,
Got a disciplinary at work. Slap on the wrist because he sunk a ship. Wow.
whilst others were old and verging on obsolete.
Okay.
Still others were basically refitted aristocratic yachts and patrol vessels and auxiliary cruisers, entirely unsuited to war,
Yeah,
but which
just
had
a little
received a
bit.
few random guns bolted on where they would fit anyway. And any idea of asking for reinforcements was put off by the likely candidates, even more obsolete ironclad vessels and coastal defence units, which were swinging at anchor across the bay. To compound matters, Rozhesvensky was told his ships would receive enough ammunition for a major battle and a small amount of reserve,
Okay.
but this would not be enough for gunnery practice on the way.
Oh.
Let's briefly take a look at some of the ships involved. The primary assets of the 2nd Pacific Squadron were 5 modern battleships: the Prince Suvorov, the Alexander III, the Borodino, the Orel, and the Osilya-Baya. The first 4 were brand new Borodino-class battleships, and all 5 of them were capable of 18 knots.
Okay.
There were 2 older battleships, Sisoi Veliki and Navaren, which could make 15 knots on a good day with a following wind.
Okay.
There were 4 relatively fast modern cruisers, the Oleg, Aurora, Zemchug, and Izmrud, and the Dmitry Donskoy, which was 21 years old and getting a bit long in the tooth.
That looks like quite like a much older, outdated ship. You'll have to explain to me. I've never asked this up until now. What is the distance? So when Alex is talking about this ship can do 18 knots, what does that mean? What does that mean to me? Can someone explain knots for me?
Svetlana and Almaz were fairly new and fairly fast, but they were the aforementioned converted aristocratic yachts, and
it's a yacht with
their armour was
artillery
non-existent.
on.
The protected cruisers were Ural, Kuban, Terek, Rion, and Deipner, and were, as the name suggests, fast steamers that had random guns slapped onto them. 9 torpedo boats, a hospital ship, several supply ships, and an icebreaker were assigned to escort the larger vessels.
That sounds sensible.
And while we're on the subject, let's briefly discuss the names of the ships. So the battleships, as with most nations, were usually associated with something grand and important.
Yes, normally
Prince
people.
Suvorov was named after a famous Russian general.
Okay.
Borodino was named after a battle with Napoleon.
Yeah, okay.
Osilya-Baya had been the name of a warrior monk back in
Oh.
the 14th century. The Alexander III was the previous Tsar.
Tsar, yes.
Orel meant eagle, and of course
Oh.
eagle was the symbol of Imperial Russia. And
Oh, of course it is. Are eagles actually native to Russia? I mean, I know it's a very, very large area, so maybe there's got to be eagles somewhere.
Varin was named after a more recent naval battle against the Turks, which had also been fairly successful.
Okay.
And likewise for the cruisers, Oleg had been one of the earliest Viking princes to rule
Yes.
Russia.
Yeah.
Aurora was, of course, the Greek goddess of dawn.
Yes.
Zemchug apparently means pearl in Russian. Izumrud meant emerald, and Almaz meant diamond.
Okay, we've got a nice variety of names of the ships here. Some of them named after gods, Vikings, monks, battles, mainly people named after people. Oh, we've got some named after emeralds, diamonds, and pearls. Very fancy.
And of course, you had the Dmitry Donskoy, who was a
Literally.
Russian prince who defeated the Tartars, again back in the 14th century.
Right, okay. Like
The names of the torpedo boats were slightly different. You can get an idea of the flavour of their names by looking at 3 of them: Buini, Bistri, and Bedovi, which meant wild, fast, and reckless.
Oh, right, okay. Why not? Why not?
I actually quite like those names for destroyers.
Oiled was the first one.
With all that said,
Fast and reckless,
the
I get.
list of issues with the ships didn't end with their age. Many of the rank and file were conscripts from central Russia, and the fleet had obviously spent most of its winter locked in ice.
So they're not seasoned.
There was very limited time to train a crew base whose educational standards were not exactly brilliant to start with,
Oh dear.
and many of whom, until recently, had never actually even seen the sea, let alone imagined being locked in a gigantic metal box and taken away from land for months at a time.
Oh my gosh. Okay. There's going to be a number of factors why this is the doomed voyage. This is, in my humble opinion, this sounds like a huge problem, a huge issue. I know, again, we're talking about Russia being it's a massive country, in case no one knew. It's huge. So if you're going to be recruiting young lads from the heart of Russia, that unless you have trained them, unless you've sent them to the coast, you've had them training at sea. This is an entirely new experience for them. They are as green as it gets, and this is your crew. Okay.
One officer in the forming fleet complained that one half of this lot need to be taught everything because they know nothing, and the other half also need to be taught everything because they've forgotten everything.
Oh!
And on the rare occasions they do remember anything, it's obsolete and out of date.
Oh my god.
And of course, with a group of men this
terrible.
large in 1900s Russia, there were inevitably going to be some members of various revolutionary groups who tried to stir up unrest amongst the crews. You might wonder, why was the Russian Baltic Fleet in such a sorry state? Well, that was because most of the experienced manpower in the Russian Navy was either down in the Black Sea Fleet or had already been sent to the Far East with the 1st Pacific Squadron.
I was going to say, is there a battle maybe that's taken place not too long before this? And no.
The officers themselves were scarcely any better in many cases, with Rozhesvensky, who was one of the few men in the entire fleet who had even a little bit of warfighting experience. Upon seeing the magnitude of the task ahead, and not entirely thrilled with the task assigned, took to describing some of his senior subordinates as a manure sack and a vast empty space. And this was before they'd even set sail. The situation wasn't helped by a number of his officers being outright insubordinate. As we said before, Rozhesvensky had in the past commanded very well-disciplined ships, some of the finest in the Russian Navy. But now he had cruiser captains who were deliberately anchoring their ships in the shadow of other battleships relative to the flagship, specifically so they could sneak off undetected to go and spend their nights ashore getting drunk.
Well, some things never change. Okay. So politically, a lot of civil unrest in Russia, a lot of it brewing, tensions arising. So I suppose you could maybe put some of the unruliness perhaps down to that, perhaps. But again, I think that, combined with all of these unseasoned sailors and soldiers, it's a recipe for disaster. I mean, this guy had his work cut out, doesn't he?
This was, therefore, something of an uphill struggle when it came to actually getting anything done.
Yeah.
Some months later, just before the northern ice floes began to set in again, the 2nd Pacific Squadron would set sail.
Okay.
The flavour of the voyage was set almost immediately as the flagship ran aground and one of the escorting cruisers lost its anchor and chain.
Oh no!
Whilst the fleet waited for the flagship to refloat itself and for the cruiser to retrieve the misplaced anchor, a destroyer accidentally rammed one of the other battleships and had to return to port for repairs.
Oh, that's a bit of an omen, isn't it? I love how Alex put that. It sets the flavour.
With these minor issues overcome, the fleet gradually made its way across the Baltic to the Danish coast, where the first of many hilariously misinformed panics began to spread.
What?
In this case, hysterical sailors began to yell that they were all doomed. Correct.
Why?
Because there was a fleet of Japanese torpedo boats waiting for them at the narrowest point between Denmark and Sweden.
Okay, this screams to me like those green, unseasoned sailors.
Incorrect.
Oh, it was.
The small matters that Japan didn't have enough torpedo boats to constitute a fleet, and that torpedo boats weren't known for either speeds in excess of 300 knots, nor 18,000-mile operational ranges, which would have been needed to get to this position
Yeah.
at this time.
I did think it's a strange thing, aren't they? Off where are they? It was off the coast of Denmark. I was thinking that's a strange thing to encounter Japanese forces here.
Were, again, ignored in favour of what people wanted to believe.
Oh.
A few days later, the fleet damaged the Danish colliers that had supplied them through collisions and inept manoeuvring. Another ship's davits broke off, and its cutter fell overboard and sank, whilst the icebreaker that had been assigned to the fleet was handled so poorly that Rossesvensky actually fired several shots across its bow to make it stop after it refused to acknowledge the Admiral's signals. He then sent it home.
This poor guy, he has got such a task, hasn't he? Okay. Right from the word go, this is looking like a bit of a circus, isn't it, really?
This voyage would be a unique personal hell for one Eugene S. Politovsky, a very bright and responsible man who was serving as the fleet's chief engineer at the relatively young age of 30. He would now find himself crawling about in the hold of the Buistri, seeing to repairs. Throughout the whole voyage, poor Politovsky would end up dealing with repairs nearly every day, constantly moving from ship to ship, holding on to ropes, ladders, and anything else he could get his hands on, whilst boarding vessels in stormy mid-ocean seas, often to very little gratitude, seeing as he was, after all, a mere engineer and not one of the aristocratic officers.
A mere engineer who was solely responsible by the sounds of it, or at least, maybe leading like a small team, maybe. Solely responsible for the maintenance and smooth runnings of all of these ships. Oh my gosh. How pig-headed could you get?
Further rumours began to spread. The Japanese had mined the seas, the Japanese submarines were nearby, and so on. Fed up, Rossesvensky tried to calm them all down by issuing an order that no vessel of any sort must be allowed to get in amongst the fleet.
Okay.
Right on cue, a small fishing boat carrying messages from the Tsar appeared. The hysterical gun crews, of course, opened fire. A short while later, Rossesvensky was receiving the fishermen aboard his flagship, who came with the news that, for his troubles, he had been promoted to Vice Admiral. The gunnery on the way in had been so bad that the combined firepower of dozens of warships had not so much as scratched the fishing boat. At this point in our story,
at least he got his promotion.
We first meet the fleet repair ship Kamchatka, who everyone would soon become regrettably familiar with. Her entry into our account here was her signal that she was under attack by torpedo boats. When she was asked how many, she replied, "About 8, from all directions."
Okay.
Eventually, someone twigged to the fact that absolutely nobody else could see so much as a seagull, let alone any exceptionally lost Japanese torpedo boats. When nothing actually happened, Kamchatka refused to say that it was a false alarm, only that it had altered course and the torpedo boats had gone away.
Why would you? There's got to be more than that, surely. Why would you? There's no benefit to lying about that. There's got to be a huge misunderstanding, like a colossal stupidity off the scale misunderstanding that's happened here, and everyone's too embarrassed to own up to it. So they're just like, well, we were attacked. It's just we changed course now, and they've obviously gone away. But it did happen.
Having survived attacks from phantom Japanese torpedo boats and submarines, and having negotiated a non-existent minefield, the squadron sailed into the North Sea. Surely, in this lovely expanse of open grey water, nothing could possibly go wrong. Well, It was at this
Foreshadowing.
point that they came across the Hull trawler fishing fleet out on the Dogger Bank. Clearly, the profiles on the slow-moving trawlers with their fearsome armament of fishing nets matched fast, low torpedo boats, and concluding that another fleet of Japanese torpedo boats was about to attack, the Russians opened fire. Shells splashed down everywhere. A number of Russian ships signalled that they'd been hit by torpedoes, and on one battleship, some of the crew donned lifebelts and lay prone on the deck, preparing to sink, whilst others charged around madly, swinging cutlasses and wielding pistols, yelling that the ship was being boarded by the Japanese.
Please. I'm kind of expecting the next phrase to be, but there wasn't any, there's no proof of any Japanese ships, or please.
Which caused even more panic.
Okay.
The Russian battleships, of course, continued firing, finally hitting something. They managed to cause damage to 4 rather bewildered British trawlers and sank another one. A column of 7 battleships managed to completely ignore the trawlers and engaged 2 of their own cruisers, the Aurora and the Dmitry Donskoy, eventually scoring a number of hits on the Aurora, fortunately without too much effect, although the ship's chaplain would later die of injuries.
Oh my god.
Rozhesvensky appeared to be the only one in the fleet who could recognise trawlers in the flagship's searchlights, and ran about the flagship, the Suvorov, frantically trying to get the various searchlights pointed skywards, which was a signal not to engage. But various gunners all over the ship were engaging at will, and so calling off the assault took some time.
So, I know there's more to come, but so far we can write off every incident here down to inadequate training, maybe. I think that's fair. Miscommunication. A lack of preparation, maybe. Which goes maybe hand in hand with, insufficient training. I'm trying to be as polite as possible, but this is looking like a circus, isn't it? This is. I'm trying to not be rude. This is a bit of a shit show, isn't it?
Dawn's light revealed that
attacking their
in the
own
mass
ship.
hysteria, the Russians' only saving grace was that their gunnery had been so appallingly bad that the overall damage had been kept to a minimum.
That's
A number of
what I was
ships had
saying.
fired off a good portion of their total shell stockpile without hitting anything. The surviving trawler fleet presumably made good on any recently pulverised Piscenes.
So, okay, the saving grace was that their aim was awful. So it didn't hit the target anyway. That's so bad. Okay, and let's not ignore the fact that they were not equipped with an awful lot of ammunition to begin with. There wasn't enough for any kind of what do they call it? Any kind of like gun practice, or there was only enough to support them in the incidents that they came across the enemy and engaged in open fire, and a little bit spare. Did they say it's a little bit of spare ammunition there? But they're not equipped for this. Oh, who answers for this? I know it's hard to say. I think because everyone is so ill prepared for this and not adequately trained, who ultimately is going to get the finger pointed at them to say, like, "Ooh, you're fired. You're fired." A bit of an Alan Sugar thing, like, "You're fired." Who's going to get the blame for this?
For rather obvious reasons, the Tsar was relatively quick to apologise,
Okay.
but British public opinion and media were not so easily dissuaded. They did not believe that such an assault could really be accidental, and demanded war against Russia. Cruiser squadrons began to show up with alarming frequency.
This is suddenly turned into not funny. Okay, so the sheer stupidity of this can only be perceived by the other nations as an open act of war. I mean, you can understand, can't you? It's kind of hard to believe that this is accidental.
Around the Russian fleet, whilst the entire Channel Fleet, itself larger than the entire combined forces of the Russian Navy, was ordered to raise steam and prepare for action. The entirety of the modern components of the Mediterranean fleet were also activated and ordered to move to the Straits of Gibraltar, a combined force that outnumbered the Russian 2nd Pacific Squadron 4-1. Moving to trap the Russians in a pincer between the Mediterranean and Channel fleets, and having reviewed the horrible gunnery of the Dogger Bank incident, Admiral Beresford was preparing an attack plan which he described in a letter as chivalrous, proposing to make it a fair fight by only engaging the entire Russian force with 4 of his British battleships, holding the others in reserve just in case some of his ships actually took a hit or two.
Meow. What? I mean, chivalrous. It's like a backhanded compliment, isn't it? Not even a compliment. It's like, I'll do you a favour because we've just witnessed how awful your aim is. Tell you what, we'll only use four of our ships. Make it a fair fight. Meow.
The Russian forces were also at this point somewhat divided, with some of the older vessels planning to go via the Suez Canal so as not to further delay the more modern units which were capable of faster steaming.
Okay.
Now, to be fair, it wasn't completely unreasonable for an extremely paranoid captain or other officer to believe the Japanese could have tried to take some kind of action in the North Sea. After all, at this time, most of the Japanese warships were built in British shipyards and passed through the Channel to get to Japan.
Not totally ridiculous.
And various Russian spies had been claiming to spot torpedo boats at sea for quite some time.
Oh, how... Wouldn't it be interesting if we all found out, actually, they weren't making it up. There were Japanese forces here. They were right. Is that likely?
But the idea that the British had crash-built an entire fleet of ships in a couple of months, capable of challenging the entire 2nd Pacific Squadron, then handing them over to the Japanese, who somehow had teleported several thousand crewmen across half the planet, was still somewhat absurd. Furious diplomatic signals between the British and Russian governments narrowly averted the order to open fire, but one of the concessions made was that Rozhesvensky would have to dock before the fleet left European waters and leave behind the officers who had been responsible for attacking the British trawlers.
Oh, okay.
Making the best of an opportunity, he used these orders as an excuse to beach one Captain Clado, who had criticised his command all the way from Russia, and despite being an officer, Rozhesvensky and Clado had very nearly come to blows on the bridge of the flagship a few days previously. Since he'd been below decks and therefore not involved in the Dogger Bank debacle, Clado was ordered to return to St. Petersburg to organise reinforcements.
Okay.
But with any ships in the Baltic Fleet that were worth sending, and some that probably weren't worth sending anyway, having already been dispatched, this gave him the perfect excuse to start rounding up old, obsolete vessels which had been rejected in the first place as being old tubs, and designated by some of the less kind officers as the sink-by-themselves squadron. This was a far cry from what Rozhesvensky had been promised by the Tsar, upon his suggestion, which was for the Russian government to buy a small fleet of modern cruisers from Chile and Argentina and send them across the Atlantic to join him. If you've watched our video on the South American dreadnoughts, you'll know why this was, with Chile and Argentina having recently signed a peace treaty and disarmament treaty mediated by the British, and so they had a fair number of relatively modern ships available for sale at the time. Be that as it may, the main fleet finally cleared European waters, with British cruiser squadrons being the last to withdraw from shadowing them. An officer aboard the cruiser HMS Diana noting that Rozhesvensky's own squadron was notably superior to the others in the fleet, expressing the opinion that it was in fact the only one that could conceivably be said to be ready for war,
The
apart
only
from
one.
the cruiser Aurora, which happened to be a shining example of good naval conduct
But it's already
in
been targeted and
amongst,
hit.
well, the rest of the 2nd Pacific Squadron.
Wasn't the Aurora one of the ships that they opened fire on? So, well, I mean, fortunately, it sounds like the gunnery wasn't very good. So, very few blows actually landed on their target, but it was still targeted.
Below
Was
decks,
it in good
poor
shape?
Chief Engineer Politovsky, getting a short break from repairs, wrote, "Lying on my back last night, I watched the rats making themselves at home in my cabin. I used to sleep with my feet towards the door, but I've now put my pillow there. The rats can jump from the writing table onto the settee and could easily have jumped onto my head."
Ugh.
His reason for rest could have been related to the fact that the fleet had lost contact with the Kamchatka for some days, and was probably hoping that the ship was gone for good. But the Kamchatka eventually showed up with news. Whilst the main fleet had almost triggered a war with the British Empire, she'd managed to outdo them all
Oh,
by reporting that not only had she fired 300 shells in an engagement with 3 Japanese ships, but in fact had shot at a Swedish merchantman, a German trawler, and a French schooner, putting
do you think who's navigating this ship? Who's making these reports? Do you think maybe I don't know, maybe they're not quite all there and they're imagining all of these ships that are attacking them and they fired at? There's a bit of a repeating pattern here.
the Russians at odds with almost every other major European fleet in existence. Fortunately, everyone else seemed to cotton on to the truly appalling level of captaincy on the Kamchatka, and those incidents were quietly dropped.
Okay.
This was coupled with the fact that Kamchatka's truly appalling levels of gunnery prevented it from having started several new wars by not
Oh.
actually hitting anything.
Oh, so maybe it had come into contact with these forces. Well, not the Japanese. I don't think that's likely. So maybe they had come across these forces, but their aim is so bad, didn't actually hit anything. Um, it's kind of hilarious.
To cap it all off, it turned out that as the fleet had left Tangier, one ship had managed to cut the city's underwater telegraph cable with her anchor, which then
Oh,
prevented the port from communicating with Europe for 4 days. Kamchatka was ordered to take the lead of the column of supply ships, not because of any naval prowess or competency on the part of her captain, but because Rosesvensky did not trust her in the slightest and wanted the ship as close as possible so that he could keep an eye on
ah,
it. The ships were now reaching the end of the coal supplies that had been loaded in Russia and Denmark, and needed to meet up with a convoy of German coal ships off West Africa. To minimise the number of times that this needed to be done, they were ordered to take on double loads of coal.
oh.
Of course, there wasn't enough space in the bunkers, and so coal was stored everywhere else, on
Is that going to contribute to the weight on the ship? That can't be good?
deck, in storerooms, in the passageways, etc. This in turn resulted in the ships being covered in a fine layer of coal dust, which in combat was about as beneficial as pouring petrol over every available surface and then trying to
Yeah.
light a match.
Oh
As
no!
if accidentally turning their ships into a procession of fuel air bombs wasn't bad enough, as the ships passed down the African coast, the coal dust that was in the air combined with the humidity to coat everybody's throats and lungs with thick black gunk,
Oh,
which killed a number of seamen who were more vulnerable to respiratory issues.
um, this just keeps getting worse and worse, doesn't it? It's like just the ultimate example of a series of incredibly bad decisions. Oh my gosh. Okay, yeah. I did have a bit of an afterthought there, like, oh, what about the health of the sailors on board? Because that coal dust that can't be good. Yeah, okay, there we go. Combined with the humidity, it's made it even worse. Um, is it not contributing to the weight of on the ships as well? Like, That can't be good. I'm hearing all of these terrible, terrible decisions here. And I don't know, it's kind of reminiscent of the similar awful decisions made about the Titanic. The lack of lifeboats, not being present on the ships by half. um, just a number of terrible, terrible decisions. And, it always ends badly.
Some respite was brought when the fleet sailed into a storm, the wind and water clearing the air, at least.
Okay.
But the Kamchatka couldn't possibly allow even a small bit of fortune, so when she was asked for her status as part of a general roll call, instead of sending back the "we are all right" signal, the
Right.
message "do you see torpedo boats?" was sent, resulting in another panic as the fleet looked for more magical Japanese torpedo craft bobbing around in an Atlantic storm.
Right, I'm convinced the captain here is like the biggest pessimist on the planet. There's something. Is he well? His mental health. I'm starting to question. Very pessimistic, to say the least. He's seeing these torpedo ships everywhere. Is it possible that there was something going on with the communication? Like there were errors popping up here, there, and everywhere, because it seems to be the same things that they're describing like over and over again. These same mistakes. How do they communicate with each other? Is it like via radio, or I don't know, like, is it telegram, or maybe is it possible that there's just an error in communication here?
Rozetsvensky took out some of his frustrations by inventing new nicknames for various captains and ships which had annoyed him.
Yeah.
Thus, he found himself giving orders to the slutty old geezer, the polished fidget, the brainless nihilist, the guard's uniform hanger, and others. When he was beset by these fits of rage, as he was finding was more and more appropriate as time went on,
Yes.
he often would hurl his binoculars over the side of the ship. Aware of this habit from prior experience, his staff had brought a box with no less than 50 pairs of binoculars with them. Occasionally, when it got too much, Rozetsvensky would content himself by going out onto a bridge wing and screaming across the 5 miles that separated him from the lecherous slut, which was his new designation for the Kamchatka.
Lecherous slut. I like this fella. He's got a great sense of humour. Yeah, okay. I can understand the frustrations, 100%. This gentleman is very overstressed. He's got a lot of incompetencies to deal with. I don't know how he hasn't burst a blood vessel or something, or had develop a heart condition with the stress here.
As the fleet neared Cape Town, Rozetsvensky received a signal that Clado was sending the reinforcements of the 3rd Pacific Squadron to join him.
Okay.
Knowing that this would be a geriatric collection of truly obsolete vessels that would do nothing other than hinder him, he resolved to avoid any contact with them if at all possible, and henceforth would refuse to share his position or progress with Central Command. Meanwhile, a sarcastic British official took the chance to cable the Russians to let them know that there was another British fishing fleet operating near Durban, just in case.
Guys, we know you struggle to identify these, so with a lot of warning, there's another fishing fleet just ahead. Please don't open fire on them. But to be aware that they're there. Meow.
Morale, however, now took a huge blow when, as they approached Madagascar, they learned that Port Arthur had surrendered, and the surviving vessels of the 1st Pacific Squadron had mostly been sunk in port by artillery pieces that the Japanese had hauled up above the heights of the port upon their capture.
So in this instant, the Japanese forces were actually there. Okay.
There was now a very real concern that some of the Russian battleships that had been present in the harbour might be refloated, brought back into Japanese service, and then used against the 2nd Pacific Squadron if they didn't get into action fairly soon.
Okay.
To lift their flagging morale, the crews collected exotic pets on shore visits.
No, that's not the answer. This story just gets weirder and weirder, and I'm trying not to laugh. I really am, but some of the antics are so ridiculous. Okay, so to lift their spirits, they've taken what, like a handful of cutesy, cheeky monkeys from Madagascar. Does Madagascar have monkeys? Oh gosh, what have they taken on board?
But with a somewhat
lemur?
misguided idea of what was suitable for passage on a warship. These included a crocodile and a poisonous snake that caused something of a panic on one battleship when it wrapped itself around the main guns and then bit the commanding officer when he tried to get it off. Albeit that the addition of a large venomous serpent to the particular ship in question probably increased the offensive power of the ship considerably, especially in any prospective boarding action.
What is wrong with this crew? Why would you take, was it a crocodile? Why would you take a crocodile on a ship? Who wants that? Like, fascination aside, look at it from a distance. Observe it in its natural habitat. Don't bring it on the bloody ship with you. Oh my God. Right, okay. There is no control over this crew, is there? There's no chain of command. There's no discipline. I think these ships have been staffed with 18-year-old lads. Probably. Is there an element of alcohol going on here as well? Because this sounds like, I don't know, it sounds like a frat party, doesn't it? Had a bit too much to drink. Hey, there's a crocodile! Bring him on! That is so ridiculous. Are they bringing on a bird? Is this the next one?
Somebody sent Rosesvensky a parrot, which promptly began learning the Admiral's vast and thorough vocabulary of Russian curses.
Okay, that's hilarious.
The flagship was also now overrun by chameleons, which proved understandably difficult to find whenever they escaped. The crew of the Aurora was so beset by various large predatory creatures that its officers had brought aboard that they complained that they were now too scared to go to sleep as the animals wandered the deck looking for snacks. The fleet had gone from a mad collection of questionable warships to a floating diplomatic disaster to a set of mobile fuel air bombs, and was now taking a turn at being the world's largest seaborne zoo, as a bewildering variety of birds and animals were generally left free to roam their ships.
Below deck is the menagerie.
Noticing that the wildlife was currently confined to the ships themselves, the Esperance, the fleet's refrigerated supply ship, decided to contribute to the collection by having its cooling plant break down. The tons and tons of rotting meat that resulted being thrown overboard in the next few days, and this completed the sea life exhibit, as it attracted an interesting array of sharks.
You can't make this up! Oh my gosh. Mike, you weren't kidding. You don't need to fabricate anything here, because the truth is even more bizarre. No, I'm convinced this fleet is completely compromised. This fleet is completely made up of young lads, and I think they've got booze. Yeah, I don't think they're trained. I think they're young. I think they just want to drink and party and act silly. Because there's no other explanation for this. It's crackers.
Having left the Atlantic behind and now in the Indian Ocean, events would continue to take turns for the worse.
Oh my God,
The strain
that's
of commanding this cavalcade of disaster was beginning to tell.
Yeah.
Admiral Rozhesvensky was severely ill and remained confined to his cabin, whilst his chief of staff had suffered a brain hemorrhage and became partially paralysed. As a result, no one was really in command of the fleet, and so they stayed in Madagascar. And once the pet collection had been fully realised, the crews decided that going ashore to enjoy the local facilities was a good idea.
What's the facilities? Do you think that they developed these illnesses and conditions because of stress, because of trying to manage this unruly lot, or do you think they happened and then the crew just ran amok because there was no chain of command? There's no one to enforce any kind of authority. Which way round? Is it kind of like a cause and effect type thing?
The inevitable breakout of malaria, dysentery, typhoid, and every STD known to mankind.
Those facilities. Oh, okay. Sailor problems? Oh, gosh.
During a funeral for one of her dead, the Kamchatka fired a salute. But of course, being the Kamchatka, they used a live shell, which hit the cruiser Aurora, which had already been the recipient of some of the small amount of accurate Russian gunnery that had been displayed so far, and was now getting very fed up with being a gigantic steel piñata. Of course, this being a Russian fleet, the phrase "and then things got worse" was in full effect, as waves of mental illness, religious fervour, mutiny, and revolution began to sweep the fleet.
Yeah, political unrest back in Russia. You know, if you've got the residents then piling onto warships, it's going to cause problems if they're not managed properly, if they're not, kept on task, maybe. So what is this, just having too much time on their hands? So they're getting into religious debate, into politics. Okay. This is... this doomed voyage just has like every problem going, doesn't it? Everything is going wrong. And
an old acquaintance of Politovsky's took to wandering around the various ships in the fleet, half undressed, asking people if they feared death.
Why?
Some of the worst offenders were rounded up and sent home as Rozhesvensky's health began to recover.
Okay.
But this further diminished the fleet's manpower.
Yes.
And at the same time, many of the officers were quite happily unaware that anything was going on, having discovered that Madagascar did a roaring trade in various high-strength drugs. One officer had brought 2,000 cigarettes, and they were found to all be filled with opium, much to the joy of all those who could get their hands on them before they were confiscated.
To the joy? I don't think you feel joy from that. I think you just feel zombified. Oh gosh, there's no way that this voyage can get worse. Okay. Yeah, it can. Okay, there's the involvement of drugs now. Okay.
The fleet also needed to be resupplied with ammunition, since most of its limited supply had been fired at the British trawlers.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Spirits would lift when the supply ship Irtish arrived, supposedly carrying ammunition for the fleet.
Yeah.
Opening the boxes, they instead found 12,000 pairs of fur-lined boots and a matching number of winter coats.
Oh.
Perfect for operations in the equatorial seas.
Yeah, in the tropics.
As Rozhesvensky continued his recovery, he ordered gunnery practice to try and restore some semblance of order.
No, we haven't got the ammunition for gunnery practice, remember? It was said at the beginning they didn't give enough. Okay, but I'm imagining an awful lot of ammunition has already been spent on friendly fire, on firing at British fishing. Oh my gosh.
None of the destroyers scored any hits on a stationary target that was left out for them. Of the battleships, the flagship scored a single hit, which was on the ship towing the target. A destroyer squadron was ordered to sail in line abreast formation, but instead scattered. Once they'd been brought back into line, they fired 7 torpedoes. 1 jammed, 3 went wildly off course, and 2 motored along at exceptionally slow speeds, missing the target,
Of course, yeah.
and the last
That's a given.
one went round in a big circle, causing the ships to scatter again. Getting into the spirit of things, the Kamchatka sent a signal to say that she was sinking. Upon much rejoicing throughout the fleet at this news, she then investigated and found nothing more than a cracked steam pipe in the engine room, much to everybody's disappointment.
Right, the captain of this vessel is either a massive pessimist or an attention seeker. I'm not sure which one it is. Or there is huge communication problems. Or maybe we have a bit of a Jack the Lad in the communications department that just likes to invent messages and cause absolute chaos. Which one is it, guys? Somebody must know what's happened here, because what is going on with this vessel, this one, I forgot the name. This is the troublemaker. Why?
Matters were somewhat improved as the older detachment of the 2nd Pacific Squadron, having successfully negotiated the Suez Canal, arrived to join up with their fellow squadron mates after a somewhat less eventful voyage.
Okay.
Despite the wandering crocodiles, snakes, and lemurs aboard,
the
Aurora proved itself once again to be one of the better ships in the fleet, as it displayed the sole successful example of naval discipline, hosting a small race between its many boats.
Okay.
And in a great surprise, none of them sank, none of them shot each other, and they all made it back to their mothership intact.
Well, so far, this is the most competent of them all, isn't it?
Meanwhile, back in European waters, the collection of aging scrap that formed the 3rd Pacific Squadron had set sail under the command of the equally geriatric Admiral Nabokatov. The Russian Admiralty, of course, ordered him to rendezvous with the main fleet. "You are to join up with Rozhesvensky," they said. But, thanks to Rozhesvensky's best efforts to avoid that particular fate, they had to append, "whose route is unknown to us." Rozhesvensky, of course, had no intention of joining up with what he described as an archaeological collection of naval architecture, and he now took steps to increase his efforts to evade other parts of his own navy.
Okay.
The fleet would then cross the Indian Ocean, the officers amusing themselves by organising rat hunts, with a limited degree of success. On the other side, they were met by the transport ship Gorchatkov. Spirits lifted in the hope that the ship had some long overdue mail from home. In fact, the only mail on the ship was the letters that had been sent home from Madagascar a month before, the ship having got thoroughly lost trying to find its way home. Rozhesvensky took a new approach. Whenever a ship fell out of line, or otherwise broke orders, he would now summon it to take station astern of the flagship, where he would then berate the captain in front of the ship's entire crew using a megaphone.
Oh, ooh, mean. So as long as the captain wasn't part of the aristocracy, didn't it say that he was a bit prone to fisticuffs, a bit of beating? Can we expect that from him? Or maybe he's, I don't know, maybe he's softened a little bit because he's had a bit of a bad time being unwell, hasn't he? Been a bit poorly. Okay. I kind of feel at this point, I don't think that's going to work. You can berate them all you like. I don't think it's going to make them shape up. Maybe.
On the 11th of May 1905, Rozhesvensky's evasive efforts finally failed as the 3rd Pacific Squadron, having made surprisingly good progress, largely by cutting out Africa entirely and going via the Suez Canal, as had the older ships in the 2nd Pacific Squadron, managed to find the main fleet over the coast of Indochina. Rozhesvensky hadn't used the canal for the bulk of his fleet because he saw it as hazardous. Any ships would be sitting ducks as they navigated this particular pinch point, and he didn't want to risk his whole fleet, as this was one of the few places that the Japanese could actually plausibly have sent a force to intercept him.
At the Suez Canal. We're still talking about the Suez Canal, aren't we? How would they have done that?
The other issue was that the bulk of the 2nd Pacific Squadron would have created a monumental traffic jam in the canal. As it was, when the 2 lesser squadrons of Russian forces had proceeded through, obviously stopping to scan for enemy activity and putting all their gunners on alert in case the Japanese had developed a sand-going torpedo boat, a long, long line of deeply annoyed merchant ships had backed up behind the battleships, horns blaring all the way. Deeply irritated, Rossesvensky tendered his resignation, but the Tsar rejected it.
Oh, he's had enough. I thought he was going to resign much earlier on, to be fair. How much stress can one man take? Oh.
Over in the Imperial Japanese Navy, Admiral Togo had been monitoring the Russians' progress all along. On May the 25th, he learned that Rossesvensky had sent away the colliers that had arrived at Shanghai to meet the fleet. With no resupply of coal, this meant that the Russians must be planning on taking the shortest route, through the Straits of Tsushima between Japan and Korea. Early on the morning of May 27th, a lookout aboard the Ural signalled that 4 unidentified ships had appeared behind the 2nd Pacific Squadron. It was to be the beginning of the Battle of Tsushima and the end of the 2nd Pacific Squadron's voyage. But that particular tale will be a story for another time.
Oh!
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.
Oh, no, it can't end there. It can't end there. I want to know what happened. I mean, ultimately, am I right in thinking that's not going to be that much of a battle at this point? From what we've heard of the Russian warships and the 2nd Pacific Squadron, the gunnery, the aim, doesn't sound amazing. The condition of a lot of the ships, not great, but at least they're together now, aren't they? The 3rd and the 2nd. The morale of the men. Is it a battle, or was it just a crushing defeat at this point? It doesn't sound like there's going to be much resistance back from the Russian forces. Oh no, I need to know what happens. I think I can imagine what's going to happen, but I need to know. That was very, very interesting to watch. So thank you very much, Mike, for requesting that video. I hope you enjoyed watching along with me, guys. I ask so many questions every video. So if you have any answers to those questions, just let me know in the comments. I always read through them. Thank you very much for taking the time to comment, guys. But oh my gosh. I'm trying to be polite by not referring to it as shit show, but it's pretty much what it was, really, wasn't it? I don't think I've heard of such a bumbling kerfuffle in all of history. I mean, statistically, there's got to be some, but this is the biggest display of incompetence, undertrained, underprepared. What can you say? But not only that, it's actually quite entertaining to hear the stories. Picking up all those animals in Madagascar. What is wrong with you? Oh my gosh. So much. So many things. Anyway, guys, I hope that tickled you at least a little bit. Some of those details are quite, they're so ridiculous, they're actually comical. So I hope you enjoyed watching along with me, my lovelies. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you on the next video. Bye-bye.